So there's some important developments with Bootstrap that are super cool that are going to make your life much easier. One of those things, of course, is the so we head over to the documentation section. Over here we have the layout section. So I'll direct you to layout. And we're going to kind of parse through this a little bit. But the whole idea behind layout is that with some very simple addition of some classes to your markup, we can get very, very robust layouts. And the cool thing about last year when we were working with Bootstrap, we were at version 3. I think it's 3.71 or something like that. So all of the things that you've learned in CSS so far, like things like floats and clears, and sizing things, and trying to get things to arrange themselves on a page so that everything just doesn't explode and go all over the place. Those floats and clears, kind of those traditional way, that traditional way of laying out the page, powered much of Bootstrap up to and including version 3. With version 4, which is in beta, and only really just kind of hit the wild recently, we now are using Flexbox. And the beauty of Flexbox is A, its support is much broader, B, it's more stable than floats and clears, C, it's easier to fix, and D, to some degree, it's easier to understand. It takes a little bit of a mental leap from floats and clears and positioning and things like that to kind of understand what Flexbox is, and we'll sit down and we'll in fact devote an entire class to understanding how to move things around in a Flexbox way. But this is powered by the grid layout that we're going to learn today is powered by Flexbox.
Are we going to be learning the CSS grid itself?
Yes. Yes. And in a sense, you can use Flexbox within grid containers to do even more incredible things. So it's kind of like Flexbox was kind of baby steps, right? And CSS grid is like, we're all in. We can totally use CSS to design a grid for the page, right? And if you think about a grid layout, I think about more complex layouts. If you imagine something like we'll head over to the New York Times, and a portal like this. And are we here? A portal like this is a grid, right? You have a lot of different components, a lot of different panels of information. Sometimes Google likes to call them cards, for example. But the layout here is complex. Not only is it complex, but it needs to be aware. This one isn't so much aware. It should be aware of the context in which it's being viewed. For example, if it's on a smartphone or if it's on a tablet or the tablet's in landscape, maybe having 4 columns is too much, right? It's just too much to cram into that space. Could we rearrange things? So something like the Boston Globe is a really good example of so a grid-based layout, but then as we adapt the device, it is responsive. So the navigation changes, and the layout goes from a grid to, at its very, when we're down to a very, very small screen, a very linearized format, right? So this is called mobile first, where this, at the very least, the small screen has to work and make sense. And then as we are able to add a bit of width to our experience, at certain points, at certain widths, we can maybe adapt the layout and maybe add grid components. Maybe there's some of these rows have a couple of columns here, put images side by each. Maybe at a certain point we can jump to 2 columns. And then at a certain point, whether we're on a fully fledged notebook or on a desktop, let's put in 3 or even 4 columns, right? That takes to do that by hand with floats and clears would take a lot of time, right? A lot of time, and would be hopelessly prone to errors, and particularly if you have a team of people working on all these templates, right? You know, it's going to be very easy to break. So the idea behind the a grid-based or grid-powered layout is that by at least having some very simple and very structured HTML, we can construct a grid that consists of a primary container, right, to hold all the stuff, whether your layout is centered on the page and automatically kind of the margins on the side are the same, or is it fluid so it fills the whole screen? And then within that container, we have rows, right, horizontal elements, and then within each one of those rows, we have a number of columns. And let's head back to Bootstrap. No, not the alpha. I want to go to the. Will they give me? Yeah, they'll give me that. Okay, so we're at version 4. You can step back and see. There's still, you know, and really, we're going to learn version 4 in production. If you are working at a company where they're using Bootstrap, it's probably not going to be quite common. They may not be using version 4. All of the things we learned today, all of that will be more or less applicable to version 3, let's say, right? So what's changed really behind the hood or up front is they've simplified some of those classes to make it easier to work with, and they've also powered it with Flexbox instead of more traditional ways of arranging elements on the page. So this is really, really, really cool, right? So like I said, we'll be learning Flexbox on its own. We'll be learning CSS Grid on its own. But for now, to get started, we're going to benefit from all the hard work that people have done and just learn about grid layouts, right? And how we can implement them quickly and without having to rewire our entire brain from all the past CSS-based layout strategies we've learned, right? Because this is quite different. So yeah, this will be a bit of a challenge, but stick with me because it's worth it. It's really worth it. You'll find if you can get your head around CSS Grid, or as also the implementation in Bootstrap of Grid, you're going to find you can throw together any layout that anyone's going to throw at you, just like that, right? And it will be reliable and it will be responsive. And that is such a time saver. That'll save you so much time, right? Cool. So let's see how. So we'll head over to click on the documentation at Bootstrap, and they have a little link here called Getting Started. I guess we're already kind of defaulting that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to walk you through, after I give you a tour of some of the CSS components in here, we're going to download a piece of HTML that I've assembled on Blackboard ourselves. We can work locally. It's not really a server-side thing that we're going to do today. And we're going to walk through with that simple HTML template how to power that with Bootstrap, and then how to take advantage of a grid-powered layout using nothing but CSS nothing but HTML classes. We'll do a little bit of CSS just to help us visualize the grid as it lays itself out on the page. But all we're going to be doing is learning a series of classes in HTML. That's it. Right? So, yeah, so that's cool. So let's take a look. We'll see here. There's all kinds of. If we go down to the layout section here. And I'd like you to spin through this on your own. Basically, the grid consists of 3 components. One is the container, right? And a container is just a box in which to throw content. Now, inside that container are also going to be what we call rows. I don't know if do they speak about rows here. No, they just talk about breakpoints. So inside the container for the grid, click on grid at the side here. So it uses containers, rows, and columns to lay this out, right? So our container is this box here. And that can be, you can use just about any HTML for a container. You can use a section element, you can use an aside element, you can use a div element, you can use a main element. It doesn't really matter as long as it's a block level element. And inside that container, you'll have a row, right? And the row is very often a div or some sort of kind of semantically empty element that's just there for layout purposes. But that doesn't mean you can't use a sectioning element or something else for that row. But the only thing that goes inside the row will be the columns. So this row is this box here, and then this column consists of 3 boxes inside it. And those could be divs, they could be sections, they could be just about anything else. So that's really, and if you think about it, if your page consists of multiple containers or multiple, even one container, and we have multiple rows and columns, once you rearrange the columns different widths, you can achieve any grid that you want, any layout that you want. Right? Cool. So we'll walk you through how to implement this. What I do want to pay attention to is a lot of people get when we talk about responsive and mobile first, all this kind of, it gets really complicated. You're kind of like, wow, well, are we talking about the iPhone 6? Are we talking about the iPhone 5S? And how many pixels does that have in it? And what about the Samsung Galaxy? Like, what about the S8? And what about an iPad? You know, and people kind of get lost in all the minutiae of you know, how wide devices are in pixels, and when you turn them sideways, where do they fit? It becomes overwhelming. People are like, well, when I do mobile first, what do I design for? When I go into my CSS and my media queries and say, you know, this is the layout I want for phones, and this is for tablets and desktops. So what they have is a really, I mean, this is the product of a lot of years, a lot of really smart people throwing their heads at this and saying, this is probably the easiest way to think about mobile. So extra small is anything less than 576 pixels. Right? Now extra small, we're talking about tiny phones, and they're around. Like an iPhone 4 would be considered an extra small device. Right? There's not a lot of actual physical pixels in there. We're talking about watches, wearables, right? Really tiny screens. And notice how we're not targeting a specific device. We're not targeting a specific vendor. We're targeting width in pixels, approximately. Okay? And now we say, okay, for a small device, you know, this would be maybe some of your smaller smartphones. We would say, at minimum, it would have to be 540px or bigger. Okay? So from there, we go up to 720 pixels and bigger, and that would be a medium. And phones are getting pretty capable, like the number of CSS, and be aware that a pixel here, we're talking about CSS pixels, not device pixels, right? Like an iPhone, like a Retina iPhone with a Retina display, they cram, what, 4 pixels into the space of what other devices might only cram 1 physical pixel on the device. So those are, device pixels are different than CSS pixels. CSS pixels don't often correspond with how many dots of light are on your screen. So in some ways they're kind of, I don't know, they're kind of imaginary. But anyway, so we got small, say small, and we're in the smartphone region here. Medium, these would be pretty capable smartphones at this point, and maybe would encapsulate tablets. And then we've got medium and large devices, so that would be, now we're talking a tablet here, and a tablet here, possibly like a really large format phone, like a Note, might be in this region here, right? And then when we're talking about large over to extra large, now we're talking about desktops, right? Or notebooks or television, or even big. So this is, they've kind of come up with these kind of breakpoints. These breakpoints are baked into the CSS in Bootstrap. They're already done. You don't need to set them. They're just going to happen automatically. That's really cool, right? That's really, because this is best practice, not only all figured out for you, but also working, functional. Okay, and we'll show you how to access that. So that's really, really cool. We just use those with simple classes in here to access. There are 12 columns in the grid. So that means that anytime you have a row, inside that row, you can divide that row into 12 columns. right? Now those 12 columns might be of different widths. They're not a pixel width because it's all controlled by percentages. But all we're saying is that the way you divide a row into columns is you specify how many of those 12 spaces each column occupies. It must add up to 12. So 12 is the magic number of the day. Okay? And this comes from, there's been all kinds of CSS grid powered things like Grid 960 and Blueprint CSS and all kinds of other really, really cool projects that have kind of informed this. So we didn't arrive at this 12 by accident. There is a gutter width baked into this. So on each side of a column, there's 15 pixels. You don't have to put in margins or padding or worry about that. It's all done. The white space is taken care of for you in your layout. Right? That's awesome, right? Hear the graphic designers going nuts. That's great. So that's pretty cool. Yes, you can nest rows within columns, right? So if you wanted you had 2 columns, but the column on the right had 3 rows, and this one only had 1 row, you can do that. So now, of course, well, now I can just pretty much craft any layout that I want, right? And column ordering, yes, you can reorder columns within the markup, right? Which is really super powerful. So super, super powerful. Relatively easy to use, right? In this example, we're pretty much just going to stick to divs. I like to see divs minimized where we can, because they don't add any semantic value to your code. It adds bloat to your code. So we are going to bloat our code a little bit. But always when you're adding, if you're adding HTML for the purposes of affecting the appearance of your page, yes, you're adding complexity and you're adding file size. That's bad. But in this case, we're adding a tremendous amount of flexibility. We're giving ourselves the ability to lay out a page in a very complex grid using a kind of a pre-built system. So it's the advantages outweigh the disadvantages in this case. So you always have to be mindful of that. Am I adding HTML for just for aesthetic purposes where I don't necessarily need to, or is it a good idea? Is there a real good reason for that? Okay, and so that's what we will do. Cool. So with that in mind, let's head over to. Now we're not going to download the Bootstrap. You can download the Bootstrap. You can clone it. You can clone it in a repo from GitHub there if you want. When you download this, a lot of this Bootstrap includes pre-compiled code. So a lot of it will be in something called Sass. So the CSS actually won't just run. You need a compiler. We'll be doing compiled CSS later in the course. We'll learn how to do dynamic CSS, like CSS with variables and mixins and all kinds of things, and then crunch that down into pure CSS. You can also, if you want, so we click on the download here, for example, you can, no, that's not what I want to do. Start, where's the, they did give me a link that allowed me to, no, they're just going to make me pull down the whole thing. I'll have to find that link. There is a link where you can download the pre-compiled components. It's very lightweight. Otherwise, you're going to pull the whole thing down. And then without compiling the Sass, for example, you're not going to get usable CSS. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a content distribution network to pull this in from the web. Right? Cool. So let's head over here to lesson files. We can, I'll see if this works. Sometimes Blackboard has trouble with raw HTML files. For whatever reason, it kind of chokes on them. So I've included the zip. You only need one of these. I'll try the normal one at the top. Save target as. This is out of IE. Oh, it's only going to give me an HTML. Interesting. Now I'll download the zip. It's going to do something funky with my HTML. Pull the zip down and extract it. Pull that down to a lesson module 2. folder if you would. On Windows, extract all. Ignore the crazy system file here from OS 10. I just want this here. You can, if you're on a Mac, you won't see that. If you're a Windows machine, you can delete the _ OS 10. So we just have index there. Cool. I'm going to, today I'm going to see if I can, apparently I do have Visual Studio Code on this machine. I'm going to try and find it here. Nice. Yeah, let me see. They've changed it all because I've had to learn version 4 on the fly because they've moved things around a little bit. Let's see if they. Oh yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. So this here will give you the compiled. If you download this, you'll get all of the crazy stuff. It's fine if you're using some automated tools like NPM or things like that, Grunt. But if you just want the compiled stuff, you download that. We'll sidestep this and just use a CDN for today. Okay? Well, that's okay. Introduction. Kill this. That's fine. Great. So in here, with Visual Studio, we will add a project folder. Open folder. And we'll open up index.html. Everyone see that at the back? Is that good? Is that large enough? It's okay. Okay, so get this fired up on your computer in front of you, and we'll chip away, and we're going to build a very simple, well, maybe intermediate level grid. So what we'll eventually design out here is, imagine this, there's our container for the page, right? We'll have a header, a footer. We'll have the top row here, we'll have 4 columns. And the next row here, we're going to have 2 smaller columns, and then we'll divide this into 3 columns there. So that is the layout that we're going to attempt to design using this framework. Okay. All the stuff you learn here will give you enough tools to craft any layout. And a lot of times, and you can see how I picked up a piece of chalk here and sketched this out. Really, when it comes to layout and when it comes to grid, your best friend is a pencil and a paper, not your code editor, right? Do that thinking in this way. Before, if you just can't stand pencil and paper, you know, go over to Balsamic or go over to your favorite wireframing application and design it that way, right? Do this thinking in a very low-tech way, in a very visual way, and then we head there and we use this as a reference and then craft our layout. Okay? Starting with code, working with code first and then going that way is very difficult. It's really difficult to change things too and go that direction. Some people are capable of it. I'm not. First things first, character encoding. Actually, the first things first, I already gave it to you. Define your base language, whatever that may be for the application. Okay? And we're going to put a meta charset equal UTF Unicode text format 8-bit. Okay? About XML style syntax. I like XML style syntax. Some of you do not. I'm okay with that. I'm cool with that. I won't pop my top, right? I'm open-minded. If you like that, that's cool. Be consistent. Show me that you care, right? Don't willy-nilly add the space and the end of character to your empty tags on half of them, and half of them don't. That shows me that you're being sloppy, right? Take pride in your code, right? This is craftsmanship. Right? You guys are not here to build okay code. You guys are here to build excellent code, outstanding code, right? So that means little things like this. Yeah, sweat the small stuff, right? Because when if you're in front of a panel of people interviewing for a job, and they're looking at your code, they're going to look for these inconsistencies. They're going to this person's sloppy. They're not going to take care of our precious applications. So take time. Decide. The reason I like XML style syntax is because XML continues to be a format that we work with to exchange data across systems. So it keeps me on my toes. If I move over to XML, I've already got those habits built in when I'm opening and closing a node in XML. Also, SVG. As designers, you'll be working more and more with scalable vector graphics. That's XML. That means you have to, an empty element must be closed like this. It's not a you should do it. It's a you have to or it breaks. So I think you're better to just get into those habits of consistent syntax. But I'm okay if you don't with your HTML. Now, if you give me XML and you don't do this with your empty elements in your XML, I will give you a hard time. Because that's just broken. That's broken code, right? XHTML, we had to do this. You actually had to do this. So our character set, that's cool. Add the responsive viewport meta tag. Now, this is something I haven't seen. This is cool. We go over here to our getting started. We look at the they have right down here on the starter template, right? Here is the viewport meta tag, right? And if you recall, this tag, this is your mobile. This is your responsiveness meta tag. Without this, good luck. Have fun out there. Hope it works out for you, right? Because these crazy devices, man, they like to lie about what they are and what they're capable of. This is the honesty tag. This says to the device, hey, report, I need to know what the width is in terms of your device width. Tell me what it is. Don't tell me you're a desktop, right? When you're a watch. That's not cool. That will make this interface completely unreadable. I need to know what your true width is. I also need you to stop, if there's been any kind of scaling up or down, I need to set that back. Set it to 1. So there's no pinch and zoom action already set for me when I load the page, and then everything's, whoa, what's going on? Okay? This one, I haven't seen. This is the first I've ever seen of that. Shrink to fit. No. I'll have to get back to you on that. I have no idea, but you can bet if this is in the template for Bootstrap, there's a really good reason for that being in there. Right? So anyway, I'm not exactly sure what it's for, but I know it's important. So I'm going to be intensely interested in learning about what the reason for that is. Shrink to fit. So we don't want the content to shrink to fit the device. And as I think about that, I think that makes sense. Interesting. So copy this out. Sometimes it's okay. You know? Sometimes it's bad to copy and paste others' code. Sometimes it's good. Okay, we paste this in here. That's cool. Toggle word wrap. That's what I want. Okay, there we go. That's great. Step 2. Now we have a mobile ready. Add a suitable title. Do a search on the web for untitled document. Right? You'll be like, wow, there's a lot of hack jobs out there. A lot of sloppy work. Add a title. Generally, this will be dynamically generated from whatever app you're putting together, but you may be building the template which powers that. So make sure that that is output in a sensible way. Link to the Bootstrap CSS. So one of two ways. If you're downloading it and hosting it yourself, you'll point to a CSS folder and you'll pull down bootstrap.css or bootstrap.min.css, minimized. In production, you want to minimize your code, which gets rid of all the white space, crunches it all down to really fast. Okay. When we're doing development, sometimes we like to have the uncompressed just to refer to it and look at the document and read. There's interesting comments in there, so on and so forth. So here's the CDN right here. Oops. They're not going to make it easy for me. Go. Copy that. Did I get all of it? I did. Okay. There's an integrity. There's a key here, and this is part of that cross-site scripting here. So this basically verifies that this is a legitimate resource on a content distribution network. That's what that's for, right? You always want to be paranoid about security, these things. Yeah? Question?
If we have downloaded that compiled CSS, why don't we link those files?
You can. You can instead then just href to CSS/Bootstrap, and there's probably is it minimized? Did they include include the minimized?
Yeah, both are in there, bootstrap.css and bootstrap.css.
Perfect. So just same thing. Same thing.
That.
Yep. So that's cool. That is step number 4. Save that. Now I'm going to. Oh, it's okay. I'm going to pull up. I have to dig in here for my Chrome browser. Okay, we'll open up this index file locally, and you should see that. There shouldn't be all I've done is just dump a bunch of kind of bogus content in there for you. Off we go. Cool. Step 4. Step 5. Where did I stash step 5? Down here at the bottom. Add all of the supporting JavaScript libraries. So again, if you download the download the compiled files, you can include that from the JavaScript. Usually, sometimes they include with these frameworks, they may include things like jQuery and some other things. Sometimes they don't. What we'll do is we will go on cross-browser here. Optional JavaScript. So what we'll do is we'll copy this stuff here. So we're going to pull this down from the jQuery Content Distribution Network. Another set of Java or jQuery plugins called Popper, and also then the Bootstrap JavaScript for functionality. So you'll need that for, believe it or not, for a lot of user interface components. Copy that and put that. That goes all the way right down just before you close out the body. So all the JavaScript libraries, those are the last tags before you close the body for performance reasons. Cool. Getting any errors? No, I'm not getting any errors from JavaScript. So in Chrome, you can right-click on the page, hit Inspect, and you'll go to your console. If it fails to pull up any of those resources, you should see errors there. Should be okay. Excellent. All right, we're getting close. We're getting to the fun part now. Step 6. Okay, now I want you to build out your basic page level containers. These are just the basic semantic elements that set up your page. So I'm talking about your header, the main part of your page, and your footer. Unless you have a really compelling reason not to include a page level header and not to include a page level footer, whether or not you render it or display it on the screen, from just a code or an information architecture and kind of a content perspective, it's a really good idea to use those, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So under step 6 here, we're going to have the header element. It may or may not. I will close the header here. Actually, I'll put it in here. And I'll encapsulate the H1. So there in blue, make sure your code matches what's up on the screen. So my primary heading, it's a really good idea to include a primary heading in a page level header. For SEO purposes, usability, accessibility reasons, and having more than one primary heading on a page generally is generally considered bad practice. That's good. So after the header, we'll go down here and I'll call this stuff here the main content of the page. So I'll use the HTML5 main element. So start that around about just before we start into the headings, the subheadings and the paragraphs. And I'll wrap all of this stuff all the way down here just before this P small. So I'll put it down here. And I'll say end of main. And then the P with the small print, I'll call this our page level footer. My bad. There. So I have my footer wrapping the small print down here. I have the main element wrapping all of the content here. Notice a nice thing, because I'm using this, I don't have to put any kind of like code or comment after this saying, oh, I'm closing such and such a div. Main, it's self-explanatory. That's the beauty of using semantic sectioning elements like this, right? So that's good. And then, of course, our header. All these comments we would, of course, ignore. Header, main. So if you're afraid that you might have forgotten a tag or close a tag or put it in the wrong order or whatnot, go ahead and keep the validator handy. Very important to keep the validator handy. While you're doing this. Because while you're building templates to be built into, to be eventually, before you cut them apart and put them into some sort of server-side application as a bunch of includes, when you're building that template, you want to make sure that it's valid. Check it. Right? You should be getting green lights. If you're not getting green lights from the validator, it'll tell you where exactly you're going wrong. If I forgot to close this header off, or if I forgot that little end of thing there, right? You'll get what I call the banana bomb. Kaboom! Right? One explosion becomes like 12 others. So this is a lot of times why people, when they use the validator, become really, they become, how do we say, overwhelmed or completely devastated. Like, oh, my code is such a mess. No, actually, there's only one error here, right? But the fact that this header remains unclosed means that you can't put a main inside the header. You can't put a footer inside an unclosed header. It just perpetuates a number of errors. So take a look at the first error, fix error number 1, come back and revalidate. Don't try and fix all this stuff. You'll go to your mind. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Step 7. Step 8. Build a fluid or fixed width container for proper alignment and padding of content. So we have two choices. Well, first we need to be able to build a container. And this is where you might be forgiven for using the div. Div is a generic element. Again, it doesn't have any real meaning. It just means division. The meaning that you just assign to that division is up to you by means of a class, an ID, whatever. It doesn't mean anything. A header means something. A section means this is a section of this content, right? That stands alone and it has certain relevance to the content. Div doesn't have any such meanings. So oftentimes divs are used just for layout purposes, right? But don't go nuts. You're gonna find a lot of the applications that you're using, they contain deeply nested, like you've got div, like 4, 5, 6, 12 layers of divs, and you're like, and you break something or you move something around, you're like, I gotta figure out, and then it just becomes a dog's breakfast trying to figure out where does this go and which div did I close and open, and right, it becomes a mess. So, but we'll show you some strategies for keeping that neat and tidy. So open the div right after the body. So we're going to encapsulate everything. This box here is going to be the div inside the body of the page. So we'll put a container, in this case, to encapsulate the header, the main, and the footer. So I'll go all the way down here, and I'll close out the div right here. Now I don't know, I'm on line 67. I have no idea what div I just closed. That could be an opening tag anywhere in my document. In my document, your HTML templates are often going to be hundreds, sometimes thousands of lines of code long. So what we do up here is we say, okay, well, there's more information that I'm going to need for this div. This div is going to be a container. So what I do here, head over to Where's my layout? Go to layout and then head to grid. So we have two options. We can call it a container or a container-fluid with a class. So how this works here is I would say class equal container. Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Couldn't we use a body as container?
Yes. Yeah. But be aware that browser vendors, rendering engines, were not originally built to handle the body as the page level container. And I've been up against this for years. And I don't like this idea. This is just adding additional code to my page. Like, why couldn't I just say this is the container up here? You can, but just with caution, test it. Make sure like that doesn't throw, like, if that throws Chrome on Android out for, chucks it a real wobbly and it goes, like, you've got a problem, right?
Normalize wouldn't save it or fix it, or
not. I haven't read anything about that. I don't know. I don't know. I think you're taking your chances with that. I'm with you 100% of the way. I just don't know what it. Sometimes there's the ideal, and then there's when rubber hits the road. And sometimes, you know, I guess I've got enough battle marks now to know that sometimes this is the way I so badly want things to be, but maybe I should just do it this way and then just enjoy my Friday night.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You guys will be up against this. You'll be at work on a Friday night. You'll want to get out of there, and you'll know there's the super awesome way to do it. You know there's the good enough way to do it. I'm not saying that good enough it should be your regular every day, but sometimes, you know, yeah, you can do that's what you're talking about is very elegant. With a little bit of effort, it could be done. Just weigh things out, right? Cost, benefits, and risks and benefits always. So now I have a div equal container. What I want you to do is go to the very bottom here and say, and I'm going to be looking for this in your code. If I see a whole pile of divs closed out, I'm going to be like, what are they? Because they don't mean anything. They're just divisions in your page. I want to see this. I want to see a comment in here. Whoops, not like that. A CSS comment like that. Dot. I want to see that. So that gives me a quick little comment. I know that's the close of the div class container. I need to see that. Particularly when we get into frameworks where you're going to be using a ton of divs. It's going to help you. It'll help your fellow developers. You know, invariably you're going to go off on a weekend or off for a week, and some sap's going to be sitting at your desk going, what is this code? And I got to fix it, and I can't figure it. They're going to curse your name. Right? Don't do that to people. It's not nice. Right? Always name, if you're using something like a very generic container like a div, put a little comment in there. It only takes another extra second. And tell me what div you have closed. Class container. Awesome. Let's see if everything works. Let's head over to, and if we reload our page, we should see you should see an automatically centered layout. Right? You'll actually see that with it actually snaps to different breakpoints. You see that? See the breakpoints? They're already built in. Right? Right down to, so we've already even got the beginnings of a mobile first layout just by adding one div and one class. Cool. Yep.
There is a way to get rid of div and not use body.
And use body?
And not use body or the div. Just add container to header, main, and footer.
Yes. And then I can avoid the div as the container element. But then they behave in.
You're copying the class 3 times. So.
Yeah, and that's okay. I'm okay with that because it's a class. But now you've got 3 independent units behaving independently, and that may be good, or it may be, depending on what you're doing, that may be to your advantage or it may be to your disadvantage. as long as you are aware of this. By doing this, I'm wrapping all three of them.
Yeah.
But yes, I like that. If it suits your needs, do it. I'm okay with repeating the classes for the layout as many times as you need. This is class powered. It's all built into the CSS. That's okay. Okay, that's cool. So if you've got that working, that's cool. You've got your page up and you have it automatically centered like that. There's no errors going. You've earned your break. Don't take a breather. We'll start off at quarter after. How's that? Okay. Good blood flow. Get some caffeine. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for sure. So what's the order of operations? So you're using jQuery before you have it. Yeah. So with JavaScript or with any library you need to attach the library first, then you can use it. Okay. Okay, let's take a look at the code. Okay, now you're on Blackboard here for some strange reason. Rather than opening it as a local file. So open Blackboard and then the CS.
Oh, okay, because that's an online course, right? True Ontario Learn, I think it's called. So the interesting thing about that is it won't be in your timetable because it's not a physical course, right? This is your band, right? Yeah, it's that. Okay, so show me your timetable. Okay, so that's black. So it could be that the instructor is not yet. Yeah. You might not even so black. Yeah, last semester they will send me email, but you know, like September last week. But if I get any email, then
Okay, that's a good question because with Ontario Learn, it could be another college that's hosting the course. So what's it? Call somebody. That's not good. Okay, Google. Call Scott Kendall at work. Jenny Wilcox. No. Jenny Wilcox. Oh, hey Jenny, it's Scott calling. I have a sorry, I'm calling from my mobile phone because the Podium. Yeah. The Podium doesn't work for some reason. I have a student who's enrolled in Ontario Learn, but it doesn't show up in their Blackboard, and that's because oftentimes through Ontario Learn they may be on a different LMS. Is that the case? So if they haven't heard anything through their student email by now, is that cause for concern? Okay. Can you give me your student number? Yep. 562. Timetable. Sequender.
I think it's 7.
Sequender, SEL, AULAKH. It's showing who registered in the course. Oh, it's abnormal psychology. Gen Ed 1067.
Are they open on the weekends?
It says ODE. Yeah.
You can do all night.
Yeah.
That's what I.
It is? Yeah. No. Yeah, sorry, student number again was? 2003.
Why don't you
56.
20.
201.
Well, we're in class right now, so I won class. Yeah, yeah, that'd be fun. Yep, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, thanks, Jenny. Okay, so watch your email. They're going to reach out to you and we'll get started. Sorry about that. Today, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, but they usually close. If memory serves me correctly, it's 4:30. All right. No, not that I know. Not that I know of.
That's Tuesday, right? Yeah. You still have Monday. And today and tomorrow. Today we all
All right, we'll do a little bit of CSS just to see, because it's going to be awfully difficult to look at this, and because we're looking at a grid, we want to see the squares and the containers of the grid, right? It's going to be awfully difficult to just imagine that. We actually have to see it on the screen. So we're going to write a little bit of CSS for diagnostic purposes. That's all it's for, just so we can see physically how the grid is behaving. So the first thing I want to do is I want to target any div element, and I'm going to use whereby I'm going to use an attribute selector where a class, and I'll use the caret symbol, begins with open that up, and we're going to say we'll add a border. Let's say 5px solid red. So this attribute selector says any div where it has a class where the class value begins with caret container. And that's because I could add more classes to the div. So I have to be very specific here. Make sure that works. Refresh your page, and you should see a red square around the div with a class where the value begins with container. Cool. I'm going to write a second rule. We're going to talk about class row, and we'll come back to this. So the class rows. Anytime I have a class row, we're going to put a border 5px solid orange. So we're going to be adding div elements with the class row shortly. I want to be able to see them. And I'm using border rather than outline. The interesting thing is with outline, if you're using although adding a border adds to the physical dimensionality of a box, right? Because you have to add the border plus the padding plus all that kind of thing. If you use outline to draw these, they'll overlay one another, and then it will be confusing as to what's inside and what. So I found it just easier when you're doing any kind of diagnostic with grid to use the border property for the boxes rather than the outline property. The last one is we need, so whereby a div attribute selector, square bracket, whereby the class begins with equal to call. And I have to do this again because some obnoxious colors in there. It's fine. I do this because when I'm building columns for my classes, these class names will become quite long and convoluted, and they'll vary quite a bit. All I need to know is this div a column? If so, the class will begin with COL. There'll be other parts of the class name, but that's okay. So this is where these kind of selectors are great. So save that up. Check your CSS that it matches. So now I've effectively drawn a border, a red border around containers, an orange border around rows, and a green border around columns. Awesome. Step 9. Step over to step 10. Build a row element using a div class equal row around the first 4 paragraphs and headings in the main. So in the main, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of headings and paragraphs. So let's put a div and call this row. So we'll surround this div. We'll surround 4 of these. 1, 2, all the way down to 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to just before step 16. And then I can close out the div here. I really like code editors that have these kind of vertical lines. It helps me to format with my code formatting. Now I've got a div hanging out here in the middle of nowhere. What do I want to add to this? A comment. Help me navigate. So this is this is the end of a row. Put that in there. I'm looking for that in your code. As soon as you close something like a span or a div where it's far away from its partner, its corresponding start tag, put a piece of a comment in there. Tell me what it's for. Awesome. Let's go back here and refresh the page. You should see now. Oh yeah, that's right. Green? Should be orange. Check your CSS class. Okay. Cool. So that is surrounding, and we have that is our row. So the rows, we have a container, right, which can be fluid, a full screen, or it can be centered and fixed width across the page, but with the class container. Or we can do this. We can do container fluid up here on line 27. If I do that, depending on your layout, right, you need to decide what is what you're going to have. Okay, I'll leave that just a standard container. Step 11, build out now your columns with a div class equal call, noticing they will all be equal in width. So now inside this row, right, which is orange, I want to have 4 equal columns. Okay? So right now they're just flowing within this, right? Here, that's cool, no problem. So let's surround each one of these. Each one of these are going to be a column. So after this, we'll see what the pattern looks like. Div. It'll close that for you. Surround the H2 and the paragraph, each one of those 4 of them, with a div class equal call. No trick so far, really. Putting a comment after the closing div. It may seem a little bit, it may seem a bit much right now, but this column could contain a fair amount of code. Okay, just get into the habit. And now you should have 4 div class equal call. Closing out the call on each of those divs should encapsulate an H2 and a paragraph. If everything's cool, that's what the result should be. If it's not, it's likely you've got an unclosed div, or you've got a typo in one of your classes. So always have the handy-dandy validator. Where did I stash it? I put it somewhere. Maybe I closed it. Always check to make sure your container, row, column. Now, because I haven't specified each of these columns, how wide they will be, they are automatic. That means each one of them will span 3 out of 12 columns. So if you, in an imaginary way, divide this up into 12 equal parts, each one of these will take up 3 of those parts. Okay? The other thing to know is with Bootstrap is we are using border box sizing. So with CSS, when we have, there's our content, right? Normally with content sizing, we have, when we say the width of a container, right? The width of a container is X, is the size of the content part. With border box sizing, I set the width of the container, and it sets this, and when you add margins, when you add padding, it condenses the available area for the content. So Bootstrap is set up to use this by default. Just for layout, it's a little bit more predictable. Okay, so you can override that if you want to. You can set for any element, you can say border box content sizing instead. But that's the way sizing works. So when you specify, they say such and such an element is 25 pixels wide. It's that, not this. We don't add on to that. It's not subtractive. So that's all right. That's cool. Now we can control the width of each of those columns by specifying a number out of 12. As long as they all add up to 12, you'll take up the whole space. So I can say, okay, let's say this first one will say call-2. The next one I'll do call-5. Help me with my math here. That's 7. This one I'll do call-3. And call-2. Is that right? Yeah. Thanks for that. I know. You can't be good at everything. And there you go. Right? Responsive too. Right? And if you look, if you crunch it right down, oh, not yet. It still remains that the layout maintains its integrity. Cool. Okay. So you can also automatically size. Here we go here. Where's the part? Equal width, responsive classes, sizing, stack to horizontal, mix and match. Now we're getting to vertical alignment. No, I can't. Where did they put it? Oh, I can't find it now. Anyway, if you don't specify a a size on the grid. So if I leave this as just call, it fills in that space. Very cool. If you force this here, say I force the first one to call 12, it will force the rest around. It will wrap to a new line. That's just Flexbox doing its bit. Flexbox allows you to just continue on as if they were in line, as if those boxes were letters in a sentence, right? So just be aware, if your math doesn't add up, it will break over to a new line. Edit. All right, so this is so far pretty cool. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove all of the numbers from the call classes and try targeting targeting device widths. Just making sure I steer you in the right direction. All right. Okay, so I'll pull up the chart here for device widths in Bootstrap. So here are our device widths. So if you look at, we can add a class here, and we can add this to the call with a dash. And that means this will engage the breakpoints. So if I say a given column is to span 6 of the 12 columns, but only when we're on a small device, then it's call SM6. Right? If I want to do on a watch, maybe I want that same column to be 12, then I would do call 12. Right? If I want to, on a tablet, maybe only do it 3, I'd be call medium 3. So I can specify, I can put all those classes on the same column, and they'll behave differently. They'll be sized differently depending on the device. Right? That would take a lot of CSS trickery manually to figure out yourself. It's much easier this way. So let's take a look and see how we can do this. So let's just say for call, let's just say, well, first of all, we'll do call medium. Okay, MD. We'll change all these to MD, call dash MD. So get rid of the numbers. This might seem a bit strange. So when I go really small, they are not in columns. Okay? So what this means is I'm saying these are arranged at, these are class columns if we have a medium-sized device or bigger. Otherwise, they're just going to stack vertically, which is great for small devices, right? That's cool. That's what I mean. We're not going to be able to have on a watch 4 columns and have it readable. That's insane, right? So what this is saying is arrange this. This has class column, this div, so arrange it all of them in a column only if the device is medium. And so once you're resizing so what happens is once we hit, what's the breakpoint for medium again? 5, yeah. So medium. So it's 720px or bigger, right?
That's the container width, right? 720, not the screen.
The container.
I think screen is the other one, 760. Oh yeah, there.
Let's get that up on the screen here. Hold on. I'm going to see if I can move. Where's the tool to move this around? Down here. There it is there. I think that's the screen. Isn't that registering the screen? It's the window object. Yeah.
It says here the responsive breakpoint is 768
for medium devices. Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. I guess the other question is, does that include browser Chrome like scroll bars and things like that? I guess we're starting to split hairs a little bit here, but it can be important depending. Like if you may have a really irritating breakpoint at a certain point where a control is here and it might be obscured by something, and just having that might be a bit of a problem. So there you go. So that means at that point a larger. So now if we change this, if we go in here and we change this to a column at, let's change it to large. I wish I knew how to do the multiple line edit on this thing. This is a PC. Alt? Yep.
Yeah, if you use the, if you hold out Alt and then click on the next.
Oh, okay, hold on. Yeah.
See, now you have your cursors in two different places.
Okay. Sort of I got it. I broke it though.
Let's hit Control R.
Outside, pick it anywhere else. Yeah, now you need to start again.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to change all of them to a different one?
Yeah.
Control H.
Control.
H.
Let me highlight this first. I don't like using the mouse. Control. Oh, I see. Find to replace. That's helpful. Yeah. That does work. The next one? Okay. Let's replace large with XL. Uh-oh. That changed everything. I'm gonna mess myself up. That's all right. Maybe I just blew away my comments. Control. I have Control D. Let's try that. Ah. Uh-oh. I got a whole bunch of them now. Oh, it's going to be wild. Oh, because I changed this already. All right. That's fun. Fun with code editors. I really should stick with one and get really good at these kind of things and then move on to other ones instead of hopping around all the time, because anyway, that's cool. Thank you. So let's see if I've not hopelessly ruined this. That's good. So now it's doing what it should. So at a certain point, this is going to be an extra large. That breakpoint will go, oh, it's extra large, so now you're going to use columns, right? So it's forward-looking. You can, and I used to do responsive design where I would say, this is the layout until we get to this point and smaller. And then this is the layout, and then we get to this point and smaller. But with a mobile-first approach, what we need to do is look up, right? And say, it's this way until we hit a minimum of this, and then we have to change it. And then it's this way for every device until we hit here, and then change it. So the approach is from consider the small screen and then move upwards. Okay. All right. So so you have what is it? Your XLs, XL, large, medium, small. They used to have extra small, but they removed that. as of Bootstrap version 4. So I guess you just leave it, and I guess that makes sense, because if that's your kind of like default, that's your like mobile first, like because the small experience has to work. It has to. That's the first and most important experience. Then we degrade to the bigger experience, which seems weird and backwards, but that's the way that's the move. Yes, it does. So we live in a topsy-turvy world. That's the way it goes, right? For me, that's very strange, because I grew up, my career was largely desktop, and then I degraded to the smaller experience. That's no longer what we do. That's cool. Change it is. So, okay. So now we've got that. Now, we can combine the two. Remove all numbers. Yeah. So now we combine those. We can combine these settings all together now, right? So we can say, okay, if we're in a, say we're in a small device, then this column is going to take, say, 2 out of the 12. Okay? And if this is a small device, then we'll say maybe this one will leave 4, and this one will be, I can't do 6, 5. Let's do 1. Does that add up? Yes. Okay. So that's cool. So let's add. Now let's say, but we want to change it for medium. So we'll say column for a medium device, though. I'm going to change it a bit, and for this particular column, it's going to span 3 of the 12. So add a space in your class, and this one will be, yeah, we'll leave that at 3. And this one I will, let's say, I don't know, 2. And this one, I mean, this would be 4, right? 4? Yeah. So what I'm saying here is this particular column on a small device will only be 2 of 12. Once we move up to a medium device, it will span 3 of those 12 available spots. It seems a little abstract, but if you look at it, so here's our small, and then we get to the medium device, and it's all the way forward, right? So that medium device will handle large, will handle extra large. You can put as many of these in here as you wish. Those breakpoints are already built into the CSS. Combine 715. Set different column widths for each of the device widths. Yeah. Smaller. For example, yeah. So it may break though if I leave this, say small, medium, and then I do call large, LG, and I do dash. Say I do this one is now 6, right? That means only this will be 3, so I'm already up at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that will break because then they won't fit at large, because on the large device, this one is now 6. I'll just verify that I know what I'm talking about. And you'll see large device. Oh. Yeah. And then it stacks. Okay, so the responsiveness is all built. It's all built in there. That's cool. What I'll do here, I'll get rid of that because that's breaking my whole thing. Let's do that one for now. That's good. Now, let's build a second row element to capture the rest of the content inside the main element. So now we have a second row. So we're dealing with this row here now. We've got this one. It has 4 columns. That's cool. They're whatever widths they are at different sizes through the breakpoints. So let's structure this one, see if we can get this one built out. So again, we have a div, div class equal row. And this will capture the rest of the content inside the main. So this will be all the way down here, just before I close out the main element. Class row. So that will encapsulate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of content. Step 17, we're going to add 3 columns with 2, 3, and 7 out of 12 as the spans. So how the 3 columns are, this is the first column, this is the second column, right? And the third column will contain all 3 of these pieces of content. So the third column will wrap all 3 of these, okay? Because they're going to be handled differently inside here. So let's go ahead. So this one here is it's easy to get lost once you start div class equal call. And what was the span on that one? Was it, what did I say? 2, 3, and 7. So this is going to be call dash 2. And that column. And what was the next one? Was it 3? Span 3. So there's our first 2 columns, spanning 2, spanning 3, and then the third one is going to grab all this stuff here. Call dash 7, right? Spanning 7. Use this as your guide here. Right? We're on this one, so this is the column here. That's why it's so easy. It's better to keep an illustration on pen and with pencil and paper. So the second, we have one more row, and that row has 3 columns: a 2, a 3, and a 7 column. We close out the row, we close out the column, we close out the row, we close the main. It's so important to have those comments. Save that. Let's see if our crazy layout holds. Refresh the layout, and there we go. So the next thing I need to show you is how to nest this structure so that you can do things like this, right? Then, once you know how to do that, you can basically build any grid you want, right? Anything. It doesn't really matter. So add 3 columns now with, we already got that. So create 3 rows inside the last column, each one with a column. So this is going to be a row, this will be a row, and this will be a row. So I'm now putting rows inside of columns. Yes, except that I want to show you that you can put a row inside of it. But yes, you could do that. And then what you could do is you could spec out that the columns are each 12 wide. And then they will stack. Yes. So yes, I like that. I like that you're thinking about less code. Always think about less code. Always think about less code. Yeah, I know. Anyway, it's the system. Like this is all getting better though. Like as much as this looks like code bloat, as much as this looks like just awful code bloat, perhaps. Like oh no, I broke it. I broke it. That's terrible. I broke it terribly. I want to end this row, and then I want a new row here, right? And then I close that row. Yeah. Row, row, row. There. Now I have 3 rows in there. Now the only thing that can go inside a row, though, is a column. You can't have content inside, otherwise you're going to lose some of those features of the Bootstrap grid. So each of these now then become a column. So we say div equal call, and I would say this is 12. Where have I gone? It's very easy to get lost, right? That's why the comments are so helpful. Row. Close the row. Yeah, if you're low on coffee, like if your caffeine levels are pretty low, this can get very bad. Really. I can tell you that, yeah, I guess we're talking almost 20 years ago now. We used to do all this with tables, and the tables were horrible because if you broke a table row or a TD instead of all this content, and the thing just, I mean, we put tables inside of table cells, inside of table cells, inside, like, it was so horribly nested, and the code was so heavy, and things just, trying to put it back together, we didn't have good validation tools to help us navigate the code. You had to figure it out by hand. It was awful. Like, it was just awful. And anyway, so as maybe as obtuse as this seems, we are like light years ahead. And it's going to get better. I'm really excited to see the CSS grid where this is built right into CSS, and we don't even have to add these classes or divs in there. So it's going to get even better in very short order because browsers jump onto these new specs like CSS, these new CSS modules very quickly. So you're going to have access to even better tools really, really soon. And we'll investigate it. So let's just see here how this works. And then we should have, so now I have a column here and then a row and then 3 columns. Each one of these columns inside. So I start, because this is another column here, right? Inside here, this is now divided into 12 again. So 12 is, it's not a fixed number. Like with that, here, that's 12. This is 12, because this spans 12 of those columns, right? So it's very fluid. It's very, very fluid, right? There's no reason why I couldn't make this a little shorter here, right? I could shorten this down so it only spans 8. You can do whatever you want. But the fact that I can do this and it's responsive and I can plug it into a variety of like breakpoints is a huge time saver. It's just huge, right? It's really worth your learning this. Okay, so that's that. Was there any other challenge I wanted to show you here? No. So you can put rows inside columns. You can't. You can only put in this system. You can only put columns inside rows. You can't put content. You can't put paragraphs or things. You have to put. If you have a row, columns go inside it, and then stuff goes inside the columns. That's just the way it works. Okay. Did all that? Okay. So step 19. Did I miss a step? 18? No. 19, of course, is validate your code, because by the time you've done building out a template like this, you could have a dog's breakfast. Something could be horribly wrong. Not. I mean, you know, it's easy to make a mistake, so there's no shame in that. But always check. Always check. And really, with this system, you can build out just about whatever you want. Okay? But it does take. The thinking is not so much do the thinking here, right? Do this thinking here, so you know this is going to be 1, 2, 3 columns, and then 3 rows. Do the thinking on a piece of paper with a pencil. Don't do this kind of thinking in your mind with code. Like some people can. I can't. I just can't do it. I'll go in my mind. Right? So the thinking gets done in. This is design, right? This is layout. It should be a visual job. That's cool. So we'll take a quick break. I'll introduce you to the lab, and then we'll take a quick break, and then you can hammer away at the lab and see if you can build this this crazy layout out. So here we go here. So lab number 2. All right. Layout grids with Bootstrap. So I want you to construct a responsive layout grid using this framework. So using these, I've given you a piece of HTML, and it has boxes with all of these letters in it. Okay. So I've already done this for you. You don't need to think through the HTML. I built it for you. I want the large layout to look like that. When it goes down to a medium layout, I want you to rearrange it so it looks like that. And then when you get to a small layout, I want it to look like that. Same piece of HTML, right? All you're doing is adding those clever little classes and deciding where the rows go and where the columns go in the HTML. Okay? So we start with this one, up to this one, and finish with this one. So you actually want to do it backwards through the lab. Okay? So there's 3 points, right? So I want you to see if you can get all 3 of these functional. You get 3 points for your lab, and that goes into Blackboard. Yeah.
Do you think would be easier starting from large or from small?
Small.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't do it this way is because the Word document, I put the small up here, and then I got weird page breaks across my tables. So I gave up.
Okay.
Yeah. I was wrestling and swearing with and cursing Word, right? I don't get along. I like code editors. I don't like word processors. They drive me crazy. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, work small. Start with this one, and then scale it up. See if you can get those columns to do that. All right?
Can we use extra small instead of small?
Extra small?
Can we just call without the SM?
Uh.
Just to make it easier.
No.
No?
No. You need to use small. Because the ultra small one, or extra small, which doesn't have that, you wouldn't be able to put these side by each. They would have to be stacked vertically.
Okay.
So maybe I should put like extra small, but it's confusing because anyway. Yeah. Anyway, so go grab a coffee if you want. Go out, get up and stretch, move about, and let's try and figure this out. You can tap your friend on the shoulder. We can, if you're stuck. It's a lab. Imagine this is an open office. This is a business problem. We're all as a team trying to solve it. Okay. I'll come and check it out. I'll come and look at it as you're done. Okay. Let me see if I get my printer. I'm just going to go to the office and I'll get the labs printed out in paper. So right back. Right back. Yeah? Oh, okay. Okay, so you're okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, usually like with the class, I'll try and get the, let me just pause this.